You probably have a laugh you're a little embarrassed by. Maybe it's a snort. Maybe it's the one where you make no sound at all and just silently shake, gasping for air like you're being strangled by your own amusement. Maybe you have the laugh that comes out an octave higher than your regular voice, the one your friends can imitate perfectly and use against you at parties. But here's the thing. That reflex, that completely involuntary full-body response to something being funny, where did it come from? Is it a cultural invention? Did it arrive with jokes, with comedy clubs, with sitcoms and stand-up and the specific modern architecture of a punchline? Or was some Neanderthal hunched over a fire 40,000 years ago also occasionally losing it because his buddy tripped over a rock? That is what we're figuring out today. But first, what actually is laughter? In the modern sense, we think of it as a response to humor, to jokes, to things being funny. But if you strip it down to what it actually is biologically, laughter is a stereotyped vocal respiratory pattern, a series of short, rhythmic exhalations produced by the same muscles you use to breathe, hijacked into a completely different involuntary rhythm. That's it. That's the whole mechanical reality of it. Which means, strangely, laughter doesn't actually require a joke. It doesn't require language. It doesn't even require something being funny in any way you could explain to another person. It just requires the right social and physiological conditions. And it turns out those conditions are extremely, almost embarrassingly old. Psychologist Robert Provine spent decades studying laughter in its natural habitat, which is to say, not in a lab with rehearsed jokes, but out in the actual world, eavesdropping on thousands of real conversations in malls and on sidewalks. And what he found should mess with your assumptions immediately. The overwhelming majority of laughter, something like 80% in his recordings, wasn't a response to anything resembling a joke. People laughed at statements like, "I'll see you guys later," and "it was nice meeting you." Ordinary, completely unfunny sentences. Provine's conclusion was that laughter isn't primarily about humor at all. It's primarily about connection. It's a social signal, a bonding mechanism that predates and outnumbers actual comedy by a wide margin. We think we laugh because things are funny. Mostly, we laugh because we're near someone we like and our nervous system is doing its job. Now let's go back further. Because if laughter is fundamentally social rather than fundamentally comedic, that changes where we should look for its origins. Not in the invention of the joke, but in the invention of play. Primatologist Marina de Villa-Ross studies something that sounds almost too charming to be real science, tickling great apes and recording what happens next. And what happens is laughter, or something so close to it that researchers now treat it as the same underlying behavior wearing different costumes. Chimpanzees produce a panting, breathy vocalization during rough and tumble play and tickling that shares acoustic structure with human laughter. Gorillas do it. Orangutans do it. Even bonobos, famously the more chilled-out cousin in the primate family, do it. De Villa-Ross's research traced these vocalizations across the primate family tree and found they likely share a common ancestor going back somewhere between 10 and 16 million years. 10 to 16 million years. Before language, before tools as we'd recognize them, before anything resembling what we'd call culture. Something that functions like laughter was already there, doing its job, which was apparently the same job it does now, signaling, this is play, this is safe, this is not a fight. And it goes even further back than primates, which is where things get genuinely strange. Neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp spent years studying rats, and he discovered, almost by accident, that when you tickle a young rat, it emits high-frequency chirps far above human hearing range that correlate directly with what appears to be positive social affect. Panksepp called it rat laughter, only half jokingly. The rats sought out the tickling hand. They approached researchers who had tickled them before, specifically for more tickling. Play-deprived rats chirped more when finally allowed to play. The same way a kid denied recess sprints outside the second the door opens. If something functionally similar to laughter exists in rats, a species separated from us by roughly 75 million years of evolution, then we're not looking at a human invention or even a primate invention. We're looking at something ancient sitting deep in the mammalian nervous system, something evolution built early and kept reusing because it worked. So by the time actual humans show up, laughter isn't new. It's already an old, well-tested piece of biological machinery. The interesting question isn't when laughter began. It's what our particular species did with it. Let's go to roughly 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens is new, small bands. The usual terrifying Pleistocene backdrop of predators and rival groups, and absolutely no dental care. And in that world, laughter would have done something specific and non-obvious. It would have functioned as a cheap, honest signal that a threat had passed. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer societies have documented that laughter frequently erupts in the exact moment danger resolves. Someone slips near the edge of a cliff, catches themselves, and the group laughs, loudly, immediately, almost involuntarily. That's not cruelty. That's discharge. The body built up tension in anticipation of a bad outcome. The bad outcome didn't happen. And laughter is what venting that tension sounds like from the outside. It is, in a very real sense, an audible signal broadcast to everyone nearby, "We're safe now. You can relax too." In a small group where everyone's nervous system was constantly scanning for danger, a reliable, contagious signal for all clear would have been enormously valuable. You didn't need to understand the specific threat someone else just avoided. You just needed to hear them laugh, and your own body would start to stand down. And laughter is contagious in a way almost nothing else is. Provine's research found that laughter is one of the most infectious human behaviors ever measured, more contagious than yawning, spreading through a group even when people have no idea what triggered it. This is why laugh tracks work on television, embarrassingly enough. It's why one person losing it in a quiet room can take down an entire office. Your brain has dedicated circuitry that responds to the sound of laughter by wanting to laugh, whether or not you know why anyone's laughing at all. That's not a modern quirk of media exposure. That's an ancient reflex, tuned over evolutionary time, being exploited by a television speaker. And it's worth pausing here on something Provine also noticed, because it complicates the cozy picture a little. Laughter, it turns out, is not evenly distributed. In his recordings of everyday conversation, speakers laughed more than listeners. And certain speakers, generally the ones with higher social status in the group, triggered more laughter from others than they themselves produced. In other words, laughter tracks social hierarchy almost as reliably as it tracks humor. The boss's mediocre joke gets a bigger laugh than the intern's genuinely funny one, and this isn't new office politics. It's an ancient pattern showing up in a modern building. If laughter really is a bonding signal, then who gets to trigger it and who's expected to supply it on demand tells you something about status that predates any actual hierarchy we'd recognize as political. A dominant chimpanzee doesn't need to be funny to get a play response from a subordinate. The subordinate has every incentive to laugh anyway. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because laughter didn't stay purely about safety and bonding. Somewhere along the way, it also became a weapon. Think about mockery. Think about the specific, cutting laughter that happens when someone messes up in front of a group and everyone turns to look at them. That's not the warm, contagious, safety signal laughter Provine documented on the sidewalk. That's something colder. Something with teeth. Evolutionary psychologists studying laughter have argued that this darker form served a completely different, equally ancient function: social policing. In a small band where reputation was survival currency, being laughed at for breaking the norm, for being cowardly, for hoarding food, for embarrassing yourself in front of a potential mate, would have been a genuinely painful corrective experience. And it would have worked precisely because it's contagious. One person starts laughing at your mistake, and suddenly, the whole group is doing it, and you feel it land in your chest like an actual physical blow. Shame and laughter, it turns out, are old evolutionary partners, and the same mechanism that bonds a group together can also be turned quite efficiently against a single member of it. Laughter, in other words, has always had two settings: warm and inclusive, or cold and exiling. Ancient humans absolutely used both, on purpose, and often within the same afternoon. There's a physiological dimension worth mentioning too, because it adds another layer to why this behavior stuck around for so many millions of years instead of getting evolutionarily discarded like so many other traits. Genuine, full-bodied laughter triggers measurable release of endorphins, the same class of chemicals involved in pain relief and social bonding more broadly. Researchers studying group behavior have found that shared laughter appears to raise pain thresholds, meaning people who've just laughed together can tolerate mild physical discomfort slightly better than people who haven't. That's a strange, almost accidental-sounding side effect until you consider what it would have meant for a small hunting band under constant physical strain, injury, and hardship. A behavior that both bonds the group socially and marginally increases everyone's physical resilience is not a behavior evolution would be in any hurry to get rid of. It's efficient in a way that's almost suspicious, one social signal doing double duty as a crude form of pain management. Let's talk about something archaeology genuinely struggles with here, because you cannot excavate a laugh. It leaves no fossil. Nobody carved a chuckle into a cave wall in a way we can definitively date. But there are clues, and some of them are surprisingly direct. Among the earliest known figurative art, alongside the serious ritual pieces and the solemn burial goods, archaeologists have also found objects that seem almost comedic in intent. Small carved figures with exaggerated, absurd proportions. Playful, distorted animal representations that don't match any known species, suggesting invention for its own sake rather than accurate depiction. Some researchers studying Paleolithic art have proposed, cautiously, that at least some of these pieces may have been intended to amuse, not to instruct or to worship. We tend to imagine our ancestors as perpetually solemn, hunched over fires, contemplating mortality in complete silence. But a species capable of jewelry it didn't need and paintings hidden in caves no one would see was almost certainly also a species capable of making something absurd on purpose, purely because it was funny to whoever made it. There's another angle here that gets uncomfortable fast, precisely because it's so recognizable. Provine sidewalk studies also found a strikingly consistent pattern by gender. In mixed conversations, women laughed significantly more than the men they were talking to, regardless of who was actually saying the funnier things. Men, meanwhile, were disproportionately the ones triggering that laughter. This wasn't Provine editorializing, it was just what thousands of hours of recorded, ordinary conversation showed over and over across completely different pairs of strangers. Evolutionary psychologists studying mate selection have proposed that laughter functions here as an honest signal in something closer to a courtship display. Making someone laugh, reliably, is a decent proxy for social intelligence, quick thinking, and confidence, qualities that would have mattered enormously in a small ancestral band where you couldn't exactly run a background check on a potential partner. And responding with laughter signals interest and receptiveness in a way that's very hard to fake convincingly for long. You can force a smile. Genuine, sustained laughter is much harder to counterfeit, which is exactly why it works as a signal in the first place. A cheap signal, one anyone could produce whether or not it reflected anything real, wouldn't be worth much. Laughter's involuntary, slightly embarrassing quality, the thing that makes it awkward when it escapes at the wrong moment, is precisely what makes it trustworthy the rest of the time. There's also the matter of children, which is one of the more reliable windows we have into ancient behavior, because childhood development is remarkably conserved across cultures and across time. Human infants begin laughing at around 3 to 4 months old, well before they can speak, well before they understand a single joke in any linguistic sense. What triggers this earliest laughter is almost always physical, tickling, sudden peekaboo-style reappearances, playful mock threats from a trusted caregiver. the exact same rough and tumble play that triggers laughter like vocalizations in chimpanzees and gorillas. This developmental sequence, laughter arriving before language, physical play preceding verbal wit by years, strongly suggests that humor as we experience it as adults, clever wordplay, irony, a perfectly timed punchline, is a late addition built on top of a much older physical foundation. We didn't invent laughing and then figure out how to attach it to jokes. We inherited laughing from deep evolutionary history and then, once language showed up, discovered we could trigger the same ancient mechanism using nothing but words. The pun is a recent hack running on extremely old hardware. Let's jump forward to roughly 5,000 years ago into written history, because once humans could write things down, they immediately, predictably, started writing down jokes. The Sumerians, who gave us some of the earliest writing on Earth, also gave us what many scholars consider the oldest recorded joke, a short, slightly crude proverb involving a young married woman that, translated faithfully, is essentially a fart joke. Humanity's first literary act wasn't only poetry and law codes and religious devotion, though it was certainly plenty of that too. It was also, almost immediately, someone writing down something dumb because they thought it was funny and wanted someone else, thousands of years in the future, to laugh too. And it worked. People still laugh at it now, mostly at the fact that this is what we chose to preserve. Ancient Egyptian texts include satirical papyri mocking lazy scribes and incompetent officials. Ancient Greek comedy, most famously in the plays of Aristophanes, built entire theatrical traditions around political mockery, absurd premises, and jokes that, translated into modern English, are still recognizably, sometimes uncomfortably, jokes. Roman graffiti preserved at Pompeii includes crude insults scrawled on walls, elaborate boasts, and jokes at the expense of specific named individuals who almost certainly did not appreciate becoming comedic material for eternity. Chinese texts from the Warring States period include recorded court jesters whose entire professional function was to make rulers laugh, sometimes as the only socially acceptable way to deliver criticism a ruler would never have tolerated stated plainly. A joke, wrapped correctly, could say what a direct sentence never could, and get away with it. The moment humans had a durable medium to record anything on, humor showed up in it almost immediately, right alongside taxes and prayers and property disputes, as though it had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for a way to survive its own moment. It's also worth noting how quickly humans figured out that laughter could be manufactured on purpose, professionally, for an audience. Court jesters existed across wildly different, unconnected civilizations, from ancient China to ancient Egypt to medieval Europe. Almost as if the role were less an invention and more an inevitability, a job description evolution had already written, and culture merely needed to fill. Wherever there was a hierarchy rigid enough to need occasional deflation, someone eventually got hired specifically to make the people at the top laugh, and by extension, briefly, safely, relax their guard. Which brings us to something worth sitting with. Laughter, unlike almost every other emotional expression, requires almost no translation across time or culture to be recognized as what it is. Show someone from any culture on Earth a recording of laughter, and they will identify it correctly, instantly, without needing anything explained. This is strikingly different from humor itself, which is deeply cultural, deeply dependent on shared context, and famously difficult to translate. A pun that kills in one language is often meaningless nonsense in another. But the sound underneath the pun, the actual physical act of laughing, is closer to a universal human constant than almost anything else we do. That gap between wildly variable humor and remarkably consistent laughter tells you something important. The specific content of what makes us laugh is cultural and recent. The mechanism doing the laughing is ancient and shared, sitting quietly underneath every joke ever told, in every language, in every era, doing the exact same job it did for a rat getting tickled by a curious neuroscientist. So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us that the desire, the need, to laugh with other people is not a product of comedy clubs or sitcoms or the specific modern architecture of the punchline. It didn't arrive with language. And it definitely didn't arrive with your group chat's uncanny ability to make you laugh out loud alone in a room. It's something that emerged tens of millions of years before humans existed, in the deep evolutionary logic of play, safety, and social bonding. Refined across primates, sharpened by hunter-gatherer bands who needed a reliable signal that danger had passed, weaponized occasionally into something sharper and more punishing, and eventually, once language arrived, given an entirely new toy to play with, the joke. Every child laughing before they can talk. Every ancient carver shaping something absurd on purpose. Every Sumerian scribe immortalizing a fart joke instead of something dignified. Every Roman scratching an insult into a wall in Pompeii, knowing full well someone would read it and laugh. All of them were running the exact same ancient program, dressed in whatever cultural clothing their particular moment in history happened to provide. Which brings me back to you, right now, with your specific embarrassing laugh. The snort, the silent shake, the octave jump. Whichever one is yours. You are not being ridiculous. You are not malfunctioning. You are running a piece of biological machinery that predates humanity itself, tuned across tens of millions of years by rats and apes and hunter-gatherers who needed a fast, honest, contagious way to say to the people around them, "We're okay. This is safe. Stay close." Laughter isn't a cultural invention layered on top of being human. It's one of the oldest, deepest signals we have, and every time it escapes you at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong meeting, you're doing something your ancestors were doing around a fire a very, very long time, before anyone thought to write a single joke down.